minutes after, oops, okay. After we finish to, I have I don't know if Tori's going to be on here too, but I have a question over a contract that we're in right now, so.
I can certainly wait a minute or two after and answer anything you've got for sure.
Okay.
That's part of what this is for. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Depending on your situation, you can also ask at the end, and because lots of people like to hear questions, so no problem.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Cool.
All right. I think we are recording. I think Rachel can let people in. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here real quick and make sure. Oops. All right. We are going to talk about backup offers today. And I put in just a headline about why. And this, I just saw CNBC, they wrote it very clearly, whether you like them or not. It's the same headline in all the news outlets right now. Home buyers are canceling deals at the highest rate since the start of the pandemic. And we are experiencing a lot of buyers who are feeling uncertain. They want to re-enter a deal because now they can get a slightly better interest rate if they didn't have a lock with a flow down provision. Lots of reasons. So for a home seller right now, I thought it was a good time for us to talk about backup offers and how they work. So we're just going to go through the details pretty quickly here and explain backup offers and the pros and cons for buyers and sellers. So first off, there's an addendum for this. God bless our state. There is a piece of paper, a form that has been approved for about every possible situation. And this is the addendum for backup contract. You can only have one backup contract. You can't have multiple, only one. And it is a fully executed contract plus this addendum. So we're going to look at each paragraph and talk about what it says. So the very first thing it says is this contract to which this addendum is attached is binding. So a backup contract is a real contract, right? All parties sign the addendum and the full contract. So only one backup. The buyer also is to pay earnest and option within 3 days. So all that is the same as a normal contract. And you only become the primary contract upon termination of the first contract. So you sit in backup until that first contract terminates. All right. Paragraph B says, if the first contract does not terminate on or before this date, the backup contract terminates and the earnest money is refunded to buyer. So if your buyer wants to wait 2 weeks to see if this deal on this house they love holds together through option, then that's the date you put. They only want to sit there for 2 weeks. If the contract, that first contract is still solid after 2 weeks, then they're not going to wait anymore. They want their earnest money back and they're going to go find another house. Maybe they want to wait until 2 or 3 days before the closing of that first home. Maybe they love it so much that they want to go through financing, option, everything, that first contract, and they don't want that other house going back on the market. So they'll sit there and wait right up until closing of that first contract. If that's the case, then that's the date you put in that blank. So seller must notify the buyer immediately of the termination of the first contract. So if you have a backup contract, the minute that contract is that first contract is terminate, you notify the backup buyer. And then the effective date of the backup contract changes to the date the buyer receives notice of termination of the first contract. So it's called the amended effective date, and that's when all the timelines start. The option period, the financing days, that backup contract is now primary, and the date starts on the day that they were notified that they are primary now. All right, and this is how they're notified. So right here, remember, we're going to notify immediately that the backup contract is now primary, and that becomes our amended effective date. This is how they're going to notify you. They're not going to send you a text, hopefully, that says you're now primary, right? There's a form for that. So seller's notice to buyer of removal of contingency under addendum for backup contract. Notice must be in writing and must be provided immediately. So there will be a seller signature and date and a seller signature and date. And then notice it states the first contract is terminated. The contract with the buyer is no longer subject to the contingency described in the addendum, which is backup status. And then the effective date of the contract is amended to blank. And they'll write in the date that they're giving you this notice. And that, then the date they put in there, then day one of option is the next day. All right. And this is paragraphs C, D, and E. And it kind of answers some questions for us. Even if the first contract is extended, if there's an amendment to that first contract, all of those things, none of that impacts your backup status. You sit in backup until that first contract is terminated or until the date you put in there passes. So they can lower the price of the first contract, they can extend it, they can do whatever, doesn't impact the backup status. And then assuming the buyer has an option period, then your buyer, if your buyer's under backup contract, they basically can terminate the contract anytime through becoming primary and then their option days. So you can terminate a backup contract as the buyer anytime you want to before you become the primary contract. So that kind of gives you a while as a backup buyer to decide if you want to buy the home or not. You go ahead and deposit your option fee, you go ahead and deposit your earnest money, and you can cancel anytime along the way. You will not get that option fee back. You do not get it back, just like in a normal contract. But you will get your earnest money back as long as you are terminating while you're still in backup position or during your option period once you become primary. All right, save your questions. You may have some. That's okay. All right, and then make sure that you include, so you need to not only have the addendum, you need to check this box on the contract, right? This is how these addendum become part of the contract. If you forget to check the box, there's some concern that that's just an interesting form out there, but it didn't become part of the contract. So check the box that says addendum for backup. And then I wanted to just make sure we talk through, these are questions that were asked to our state association attorneys, and they gave answers. So it's a really good way to just learn some specifics that happen out there in the real world. My client wants to submit a backup offer on a property that's already under contract. I see that I need to put in a contingency date when the first contract has to terminate. What date should I put there? And again, it depends on how long your backup buyer wants to sit right there and wait. It is entirely up to your buyer. How long do they want to sit right there and wait? Some like to wait through the option period of the first contract, and some like to wait pretty close to closing for that first contract. It's up to your buyer. And then this explains what I just explained about the termination option. They can terminate their contract anytime while they're in backup position. And then if they become primary, their option period begins on that first day, right? All right, and none of this changes. all of this stays the same. They need to deliver earnest and option within 3 days after the effective date. And if they don't deliver option, then once they become primary, they don't have an option period. So they would not have the unrestricted right to terminate. Now, there may be other ways they could get out of the contract, but they wouldn't have the option period. So a lot of buyers may not like to do this because they lose the option money. So that's just a discussion you have to have with your buyer, because it is true that they lose the option money. A seller is under contract to sell his property. The addendum for sale of other property by buyer is attached to the contract. A second buyer makes an offer. Should the addendum for backup contract be used? Yes. So the truth is, your seller has the home under contract. Somebody makes an offer and your seller would like it to sit in backup. Well, the correct order of events is to execute that backup contract along with the backup addendum completely, get it done, and then you notify that first buyer who's under contract. And then they either can remove that contingency and move on to closing, or not remove the contingency. And then I thought we should take one more minute. I've done this addendum before, but I want to remind you, this is the addendum for sale of other property by buyer. And what we're talking about is B, paragraph B. And this is called the kickout. So if your first contract had an addendum for sale of other property by buyer, then you must live by this kickout clause. And buyer must waive the contingency, meaning they don't have to sell in order to continue on to buy on or before a lot of times it's the third day after sale. So if the buyer waives the contingency, then you just sit right there and back up. If they can't waive the contingency, then they are kicked out and the backup contract becomes primary immediately. I know you probably have questions, and that's okay. The backup buyer must deposit the earnest money and pay the option fee at the time of execution. If seller agrees to extend the closing or otherwise change, does that change anything? No. And then, can you have a backup contract to a backup contract? And the answer, it's not usual that our state association has a one-word answer, but this time the answer is no. You cannot have more than one backup. You can't have a backup to the backup. All right. And then this comes from the Houston Association's blog, and I thought it made it very clear. The amended effective date is the date the seller's notice to buyer to remove the contingency is sent to the buyer. So that's the effective date. And then day one of that second buyer's option period is the next day. And then, can the backup buyer inspect the property while in backup position? And I don't think this is a really great answer. It says no, neither party is required to perform until the backup buyer goes into first position. It is my opinion that a backup buyer could inspect it if the seller allows it. The seller does not have to allow it, however. But if everybody agreed, I think they could. So, pros of accepting a backup contract. For the seller, no more showings needed. And you've got some marketing, you've got some interest, so you're kind of capitalizing on that. The price is secured because we're executing a full backup contract. It has been my experience that when the first buyer knows there's a backup contract, they are more likely to perform on time without hassle. And you're getting 2 option fees. So that's a good thing. And then the cons are that your home may go up in value while under contract with the first buyer. Or if the first buyer and the second buyer fall out, now your days on the market will appear very long. So there aren't very many cons for a seller. in my opinion. For the buyer, the pros are that you can secure the home. And remember, we started with a lot of contracts are falling out right now. So maybe it's not a bad idea to lose $100 option fee in order to keep a home from going back on the market. The price is secured and you have a long time to terminate if you decided you wanted to. The cons are you lose the option money if you don't become primary and purchase the home. The other cons are you must deposit the earnest money, and maybe having your money tied up means you miss another great home. So those are kind of the cons. I wanted to remind you about a form that I'm not seeing used enough, but it could be relevant in this kind of conversation of first contract, backup contract, all kinds of things. If you make a backup offer with a backup addendum and it is not accepted, it is not executed, remember to go ahead and use the notice of withdrawal of offer form. It sounds crazy, but we've had a little bit of a rush of people going back and signing contracts that were not officially withdrawn. So you don't want to find yourself in that situation. You want to make sure that if you're moving on to another home, which is great, and it wasn't ever a contract. So if it was an executed contract, you'll terminate the contract. If it was just an offer and you've kind of gone back and forth, but it hasn't really worked out, then this is the correct form, notice of withdrawal of offer. And then you're free to move on to other properties. All right. I'm going to stop share. I feel like that's just so much information and I love to go fast. But tell me what questions you have. Was that too much, too quick, too soon? Tell me situations you've been in. Okay, Cheryl, ask away.
I'll figure out how to unmute. Okay.
There.
So if you can't have a backup to a backup offer,
right,
but you have 5 or 6 people that are really close in running and they all want the house, you have to wait till it comes back on the market then for the third person?
Yes, you cannot have more than one backup contract. So what you would do if you're the seller, what you would do is say, hey, I'll keep your information. And if the first contract falls out and the backup moves into primary, then you could have another backup.
Ah, got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Great question.
And if you had a contingency and then you accepted, you got another offer, but you could have a backup offer to that offer. Like you could go back out and solicit maybe an offer that I always like to have a backup offer. So I'm just trying to understand, like, if you had the first position was a contingent buyer, you got another offer that came through, they couldn't waive the contingency. So you took up that offer. You could go out and either solicit a backup offer or, okay. So only thing is 2 offers. That's
at a time. That's right.
Okay.
At any one time, you can only have a primary, the one that you think is going to close, and then a backup just in case. Yeah, great question.
I have another one now.
Okay.
So in Michigan, there have been a few times where people have put offers on several different homes.
Yeah, they're doing that here too.
Oh, they are?
Oh,
then,
yeah.
Okay, so then how does that work if you've got 3 offers on 3 different homes and you become a backup on one of them? What happens to the other 2?
Well, so people are putting offers out and maybe even it gets executed.
Mm-hmm.
Then they are to deposit the option in the earnest, but then they have the option to terminate right away if they want to.
Okay. So they're not coming up with option fees and earnest money for all of them. Just
only ones that are accepted. So they could lose. So some of these people who are making multiple offers don't care they're ready. If all three people accept their offers, they'll deposit $100 on each one of those and then opt out.
Wow, okay.
It's a crazy market though, and they feel like, I hate that personally. I don't like it at all. I think you ought not make an offer unless you intend to buy. I
Exactly.
also understand that we've kind of come out of a crazy time, and so some people just wanted a home, so they made multiple bids.
Okay, all right, but they lose money
Yep.
no matter what. Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
And
Uh-huh.
I have a question as well.
Okay.
So reading the contract, you notice that you can add additional earnest money at a certain point, right? Is there a way to do a partial earnest when you do your initial backup offer and then deposit the rest of it when you
Great question. And yes, I think a great thing to do is to put a little earnest in that first blank. So you do option and earnest, and then you maybe wait 3 weeks or something to deposit the additional earnest money. Then when that moment comes, you need to either have opted out or go ahead and deposit the additional earnest money.
Okay. Is there any way to do that with the option as well, or is it only with the earnest?
Only with the earnest.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
I have a question, but I want to make sure everybody gets their answers to the backup contract, the context of the presentation. But I had some other things that I want to talk to you about that I think are good for the rest of the group too, if they.
Well, I think you should go for it, and then anybody else can write their question down and just stay tuned, and I'm not going anywhere. So
Okay. All right. Yeah, good. So we can make it a case study, I guess, or whatever.
all right.
Yeah, Tori's also, I think, on here too, so she's kind of familiar with it. But the situation is that we made we got an executed contract on a home here in Denton. We
Are
knew
you the
going in-
buyer or the seller?
the buyer.
Buyer.
The
Okay.
buyer. I'm representing the buyers. Yeah, it's executed, and we knew going in that there was some foundation problems. We put it in the contract that the buyer would accept as is, as long as the foundation were taken care of. And they provided us with a schematic at that particular time.
Okay.
We also had the option period, went through the option period, did the inspection, and then also indicated the same thing about the foundation on the amendment for the repairs. So we're covered in both places there. And then we went through, everything was agreed to, options closed on Sunday, the 31st of July. And then on Tuesday, the listing agent sent a engineer's report to us after options and everything were closed. And on the engineering report, it indicated that there were, the piers were on there that they were going to take care of, that were on the initial schematic, but there were 7 piers on the engineer's report that were listed as optional piers.
Uh-huh.
They weren't included on that first schematic that they give to us. So in other words, they were disclosing something about the foundation that they already knew prior to the, so in other words, it I don't know what the term would be, I guess deceptive or.
I understand what you're saying. Yes, I get it.
Okay. All right. So I got a hold of another foundation person, and they were questioning the fact too that, why would you have optional piers? You either have a pier or you don't have a pier. Also reached out to the engineer, and his comment was that in situations where we think that there may be a problem in the future or whatever, we indicate those as optional piers. So that's where we're at right now. My buyers obviously don't feel good about the situation. They were good with the original piers, but now they come in with the report after the date, and so this kind of gives them shell shock, I guess, or something or whatever. And so we're in a situation where we need to go back to the seller and determine something.
All right, so let me ask some questions. Does your, is there financing?
No, it's cash.
Ah, okay. There is always a legal argument. Now, I'm not an attorney and neither are you. So the first words out of your mouth are, I'm not an attorney.
Mhm.
Oh, I know, I hate to lead that way, but we kind of have to. But
Mhm.
there is also always in real estate, material facts allow the buyers then to respond to that material fact. So while that was presented after the option period, it is a piece of information that could I think, make a legal argument for how the buyer can get out. Now,
Mhm.
you could also end up in court, right? People may not agree that that's a material fact, but I think you have an argument to make. If it were me, you have to figure out, what does your buyer want?
Yeah, the buyer wants the house. They're uncomfortable with the fact that, we
So
got
do
the
they
information
want-
that.
Do they
They-
want, so I'm going to ask an important question. Do they want the piers done because they're worried about the condition of the home? Or are they asking for money because they just feel generally gypped?
Okay, we're discussing that right now. And
Yep.
so we're in that situation. I guess my question is that if we can't work out a deal between the buyers and the sellers over what needs to be done, do they have an option to be able to get out of the contract and get their earnest money back? I guess that's.
So it is not crystal clear to me that they do. So I think you'll be in a negotiation. Like I said, I believe that this is a material fact that was not disclosed previously.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's called a material fact. I mean, a material fact, they legally typically get a chance to respond to, and if their response is termination, then c'est la vie. Now, the seller may not agree to that. The seller may say, no, this is a cash contract. You don't get your earnest money back. And then they just both need to get an attorney and resolve it. You're not an attorney. So there is not, in this case, an automatic, I don't see anything automatic about getting out. But you can, and I'll help you if you get in that situation where the seller won't agree. I'll help you write a really mean, stern email. Yeah. I mean, we can come out swinging if we want to. I know how to do that. It still may not help, but I mean, we'll, we can give it a good solid try. Hey, listen here, you did not disclose. You did not answer the seller's disclosure notice honestly or provide adequate information. This is a material fact. Are you sure you want to go down the deceptive trade road? Because I'm standing right here ready to do it. Now, your turn to answer.
Okay.
Okay, so I mean,
All right.
we have some things we can say, and I don't mind a good scuffle. In the end, we're not attorneys, and they would have to kind of both lawyer up and then negotiate.
Okay.
Does that help you?
All right. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Mhm.
Any other questions about anything really? Back up, yes, but about anything really is totally okay. Okay. Next week, I was thinking we'd talk about PIDs and MUDs and why buyers and sellers care and when notice has to happen. And we're finding that's getting more tense in these deals. More important that we do it right because buyers and sellers actually do care about this right now. I guess buyers and sellers always should care about everything, but it feels to me like as the rules change, people get more upset. So we'll talk about that next week. And always know this is a great way to bring your questions. I'm always happy to just chat about crazy contract things that are going on. So hopefully most of the time, this will be a valuable 30 minutes or so for you. And then you can always reach out. I'm always happy to answer. I think I'm a pretty good responder. If you want to just know, what would you say? What might I say? I'm great at sending you back some suggestions, and then you can take it and make it sound more like you. But I'm always happy to do that. All right. You guys are great. Thanks. See you
you.
later.
Bye.